Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. If you ask a room full of high schoolers why they are hitting the books late at night, you will probably get a mixed bag of answers. Some might say they are terrified of failing. Others might admit they are chasing the honor roll to please their parents. A few might just want to get the homework over with so they can play video games. While these reasons seem different on the surface, early behavioral psychologists would argue they all boil down to the same biological and psychological mechanism: tension reduction. In the first half of the 20th century, psychology was trying hard to prove it was a real science, just like physics or chemistry. The man leading this charge was Clark L. Hull. He wasn't interested in vague ideas about the mind. He wanted hard numbers, formulas, and predictable laws of behavior. His brainchild, drive reduction theory, became the dominant way psychologists understood motivation from the 1940s into the 1950s. While modern education has moved toward more cognitive and humanistic approaches, focusing on critical thinking and self-actualization, Hull's work laid the foundation for how we understand the basics of reinforcement, habit formation, and the physiological roots of why we do what we do. For an educator, understanding drive reduction theory is like looking under the hood of a car. You might not need to be a mechanic to drive, but knowing how the engine works helps you figure out why the car stalls, why it speeds up, and how to keep it running smoothly. This essay will break down Hull's theory, explore its mathematical precision, and dive deep into how it plays out in American classrooms today, for better or worse. To really get what Hull was talking about, you have to understand the concept of homeostasis. It is a fancy biological term for balance. The human body loves stability. It wants to keep its temperature at 98.6 degrees, its blood sugar steady, and its hydration levels right in the sweet spot. When that balance gets thrown off, the body sounds an alarm. The cycle of need and drive. According to Hull, behavior kicks off with a need. A need is a physiological deprivation, like going without water for a few hours. This biological lack creates a state of psychological tension or arousal, which Hull called a drive. It is important to distinguish between the two. The need is physical, I have no water. The drive is the feeling that pushes you to act, I am thirsty. That thirst is uncomfortable. It creates tension. To get rid of that tension, you are motivated to act. You get up, walk to the water cooler, and take a drink. Here's the kicker. When you drink the water, the need is satisfied and the drive, thirst, is reduced. The body returns to homeostasis. Hull argued that this reduction of drive is the very definition of reinforcement. Because your action, drinking, successfully dialed down the tension, you are more likely to do it again the next time you feel that way. In an educational setting, this cycle is always running in the background. Students aren't just brains in jars. They are biological organisms. If a student is hungry, tired, or physically uncomfortable, their primary drives are screaming for attention. Hull would argue, and any experienced teacher would agree, that you cannot expect a student to focus on long division when their drive for food is skyrocketing. The biological tension overrides the intellectual pursuit. The formula for behavior Hull was obsessed with mathematics. He didn't just want to describe behavior, he wanted to calculate it. He developed a complex formula to predict the likelihood of a behavior occurring. While he tweaked it over the years, the classic version that educators should know looks something like this. SER equals SHR times D times V times K. Let's break this down into plain English, because it actually explains a lot about why students succeed or fail. 1. SER, excitatory potential. This is the likelihood that the student will actually do the task. It is the reaction potential. 2. CHR, habit strength. This represents how well the student has learned the behavior. It is built up through repetition. If a student has practiced their multiplication tables 1,000 times, their habit strength is high. 3. D. Drive. This is the internal motivation or tension. How badly do they want or need to reduce the stress? 4. V. Stimulus intensity. This refers to the clarity and distinctiveness of the cue. Is the teacher's instruction clear? Is the test question readable? 5. Incentive motivation. Hull added this later when he realized that the value of the reward matters. A student might work harder for an A than for a gold star sticker. The multiplication signs are the most critical part of this equation. If any of these factors is 0, the whole thing falls apart. You can have a student with incredible habit strength. They know the material inside out. But if their drive is 0, they just don't care, the behavior won't happen. Conversely, you can have a student with massive drive, desperate to pass, but if the habit strength is 0, they never studied, they will fail. For teachers, this formula is a checklist for troubleshooting. If a student isn't performing, is it a lack of skill, SHR, a lack of motivation, D, a confusing assignment, V, or a reward that isn't worth the effort, K? Hull distinguished between two types of drives, and figuring out how to bridge the gap between them is the holy grail of teaching. Primary drives. The survival instinct. Primary drives are innate. They are hardwired into our biology: hunger, thirst, pain avoidance, and the need for rest. In the primitive sense, learning happens to satisfy these drives. A toddler learns that crying leads to food. The reduction of hunger reinforces the crying behavior. In the modern classroom, primary drives often show up as barriers. We see this in the Maslow before Bloom movement, which aligns well with Hull's thinking. If a school doesn't have a free lunch program, they are fighting a losing battle against primary drives. A student acting out might just be trying to reduce the physical tension of hunger or exhaustion. However, we can't run a school system based solely on food and water. We need students to care about things that have no biological necessity, like algebra, history, and literature. That is where secondary drives come in. Secondary drives. The learn motivation. Secondary drives or acquired drives are learned through association with primary drives. This is classic conditioning. Let's look at money. A dollar bill is just paper. It doesn't taste good, and it won't keep you warm. But because we have learned that money buys food and shelter, primary drive reducers, the accumulation of money becomes a drive in itself. We feel financial anxiety, tension, and working hard to get a paycheck reduces that tension. In school, grades are the ultimate secondary drive. An A on a report card has no biological value. However, over time, students learn that good grades lead to praise from parents, social approval, a feeling of safety, and eventually, better job prospects, which lead to survival. Teachers are essentially in the business of manufacturing secondary drives. We want students to feel a need to succeed, a need to be correct, or a need for approval. When a student feels anxious about an upcoming test, that anxiety is a drive. Studying reduces the anxiety. If they study and get a good grade, the anxiety goes away. That feeling of relief reinforces the studying behavior. However, this can backfire. If a student figures out that cutting class or cheating also reduces the anxiety, at least temporarily, those behaviors get reinforced too. The drive reduction mechanism doesn't care about morality. It only cares about what works to lower the tension right now. If drive, D, is the engine, habit strength, SHR, is the transmission. It determines how effectively the energy is translated into motion. Hull believed that habit strength is a function of the number of reinforced trials. In other words, practice makes perfect, but only if that practice is reinforced. The role of repetition. This aspect of Hull's theory is the backbone of drill and practice methods. In the mid-20th century, classrooms were dominated by rote learning, and Hull's theory provided the scientific justification for it. The logic was simple. Every time a student answers 4 to 2 plus 2 and gets a nod from the teacher, drive reduction, the neural connection strengthens. Do it enough times, and the habit becomes automatic. While modern education often frowns on drill and kill, Hull would argue that you cannot think critically about a subject until the basics are automated. You can't write a brilliant essay if you are still struggling to conjure up the spelling of simple words. You need high habit strength, for the fundamentals to free up mental energy for higher-level tasks. Hull's theory also emphasizes the timing of reinforcement. For the drive to be reduced effectively, the reinforcement needs to happen right after the behavior. If there is a long delay, the connection weakens. This is a massive challenge in education. If a student takes a test on Tuesday but doesn't get the grade back until the following Monday, the drive reduction moment is disconnected from the behavior of taking the test. The relief or satisfaction comes too late to strongly reinforce the study habits that led to the success. Technology has actually helped us get closer to Hull's ideal here. Computer-based learning programs that give that instant ding and a green check mark when a student gets an answer right are pure drive reduction theory in action. The student feels a micro moment of tension. Is this right? Clicks the button and gets immediate relief. It is incredibly addictive, which explains why apps like Duolingo can keep people hooked on learning verbs for hours.